We're talking about game design theory and why your game needs an identity coming up. What's going on, guys? My name is Tim Ruswick from Game Dev Underground, and today we're going to talk about something that's super interesting. We're going to talk about game design theory, but not just the whole big subject of theory. We're going to talk about one specific piece of theory, because I think this is going to be an ongoing series that I'm going to be doing about specific pieces of game design theory, because I think there's a lot of cool stuff to explore. So what we're exploring today is the concept of identity and why your game needs an identity to stand out. I see a lot of independent game developers, myself included, back in the day. I used to make a lot of games like this, but I see developers where they'll make games that don't necessarily have a reason to exist. They don't have their own identity. A lot of them come off like, and this ranges, right? Like, you've got everything ranging from Flappy Bird clones to generic platformers, just like platformers that are they're just platformers. That's all they are. It's just run and jump over the enemy and collect the coins. And so identity, I think, is super critical in separating your game from the masses, because there are thousands of games like that. There are probably millions of games like that out there. And if you've got a generic game that doesn't have a sense of identity, you're not going to get anywhere with it. No one's going to buy it. It's not going to work. People aren't going to want to play it. It doesn't make sense to play it. It's not fun to play it. People don't understand it. Like, there's so many different problems with a game lacking identity. It's one of these concepts that's a little hard to understand. So when people ask me, well, what is a game identity? I will usually respond and ask them, what is your game? And a lot of people don't understand what their game is, so they give these long responses, or it's kind of like Call of Duty Zombies, but it's got like this extra mechanic where you can fly and you can turn upside down, and then this happens, but then in the story is really cool and they just go on and on and on and on and on about all kinds of shit. They tell me all the cool parts of the game, they tell me all the features, and it's like, that's not your game. That's not the identity of your game. So, top tip: you want to understand the identity of your game. You really want to understand what you're making. You need to learn how to describe it in a single sentence. Like, that is the number one thing. And this is a marketing trick too, because a lot of time when I was doing and working in my marketing company, there's a concept called messaging in marketing. It kind of relates to the brand, and basically you want to understand the message that you're conveying to your customers. And the problem a lot of companies have is that they have, like, especially founder-run companies that are run by the person that started the company, they will want to create new product lines and have all kinds of shit, and they'll be all over the place, and their messaging is just unclear. Like, you don't know what their company is or what their company does. And if you've ever been to a website where you're just like, what the fuck is this website? Where do I go? What do I click on? Like, that is the result of a shitty message, a shitty marketing message, a shitty brand. So the messaging of your game, the identity, that one sentence of what you are and conveying that properly is really important. Just from, like, if you're telling me what your game is, you got to be able to describe it in under a sentence. Like, you got to understand that, because if you can't describe to me what your game is, that means you don't understand what your game is. Like, I think Einstein said, if you can't describe it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. And that's true. Like, and I know game design is a very iterative process. So it can be complicated sometimes to create these things, like, especially like that one sentence thing, if your game keeps evolving. But it's really, really, really important, like, just as a design pillar, to understand what that game is. And I've noticed with me, like, I'm working on a game called Black Rim, which is a browser-based, procedurally generated space game. And that is like the one sentence of what it is. And I have single sentences like that, single identity sentences for each piece, like for the story, for the mechanics and all that different stuff. And those were really important for me to develop it, because I'd redesigned the game 3 different times. I started out with this one thing, and then I went to a new, like, I started out with a vertical game. It was going to be built for mobile, and the interface was built for mobile, but then I was like, no, I want it to be cross-platform, I want it to be web-based, and then, but also, like, do you go to different planets and get loot, or are there aliens that you fight, or is it all human? Like, there's so many possibilities in a space game that, like, I just kept getting sidetracked and doing all this different stuff. So coming up with that identity of what the game was not only helped me describe it to people, but it helps me stay grounded in what I'm trying to create, so I don't go all over the place. I don't, like, keep developing all these random things that pop in my head. Like, that sentence is what it is, and that's got to be what it is at all times. So the single sentence is really important. Now, one of the tactics that I have for the single sentence is you want to lead with the strongest point. And that's really important too, especially when you're conveying the game to other people. Your identity is so critical in the game, but it's especially critical in the marketing of the game, when you're describing it to other people, when you are trying to get other people to give you their time to play your game, right? You're trying to interrupt their day, basically, and whatever they have to do, all the shit they have to do, all the other games that they have to play, all of that stuff, you want them to stop and play your game. So leading with the strongest point is really important. And for example, I know I use Destiny a lot because it's one of my favorite games, but Destiny 2 beta is coming up, excited for that. But I think when they said it's a shared world shooter, right, that was the label that they put on it in 2014 when they announced the game. Destiny is so much more than that. Like, the game is so much bigger. It's got all kinds of weapons, it's got all kinds of enemies, it's got all kinds of worlds and combat and all kinds of stuff. So shared world shooter doesn't cover even 10% of what the game is. But that's how they described it, because that was the strongest point. That was the biggest part of the game, because all the little details really don't matter. If your message has a strong point in it, if it's short and sweet and simple enough to convey the most powerful element, then people will want to play it. And then they can discover all the little details, right? Like, if you tell them all of the details, one, you'll lose their attention because they'll get bored and they'll be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But two, like, you don't want to describe all this shit. A lot of the shit is easier shown to them than described. So it's really important that you understand the concept of identity, both from a development standpoint, but also from a marketing standpoint. Because if you try and be too many things, your development's going to suffer and your marketing is going to suffer. Both of those are going to suffer. And you got to be very cautious about that. So, and you got to be hyper focused too. So I would say that's the third thing, is hyper focus. You can't please everyone. You can't be everything to everyone. You can't, like, make everybody happy. So sometimes that sentence, that hyper focused super sentence that has your strongest point in it, is not going to appeal to everyone. It's going to be laser focused, right? But here's the thing. So a light bulb will illuminate a room, but a laser can cut through steel, right? So it's the same amount of light source, but it's just the way that the light is directed is different. You have to direct your light at the super fans, at the hardcore people, at the people that are going to care about your game the most. Because those are the people that are going to buy it. Those are the people that are going to resonate with it. Those are the people that are going to leave reviews and send you emails and tell you how awesome it is. You're going to turn off people by cutting out some of the stuff. Like, if you're making a platformer, for example, you could compare your platformer to Super Meat Boy, or you could compare it to Mario, or you could compare it to, like, any one of these other games, right? And depending which one of those games you compare it to, you're going to attract a different player base, right? Like, generally it's a big chunk of platformer players, but inside that big chunk there are individual preferences for different types of games. And depending on which type of game you compare it to, you are going to resonate with a different audience. So the identity of your game is really important. And identity has a lot of stuff to it, not just in marketing, but also in the development, like your aesthetics, your sound choices, your experience, all that stuff plays into the identity of the game. And your game's got to have that identity. It's got to have that sense of purpose. It's got to have that meaningful existence, you know, like it's got to justify its existence to the world. Otherwise, there's no reason for it to exist. So those are just my thoughts of stuff to think about with your game's identity. If you're working on something, post your game's identity below. I would love to hear it. And I'd be happy to critique your stuff if you want me to. But once again, I'm Tim Ruswick, and I will see you guys next time.